Christian XC1 interview covering Las Vegas and the world. It's time to discuss the Las Vegas Raiders 2026 schedule and the upcoming training camp. And who better to talk about it than longtime Raiders journalist and broadcaster Maurice Moton. Find him on X at Moton, M-O-E-M-O-T-O-N. Of course, link in the description below. Of course, he's an NFL and breaking news reporter for Bleacher Report. And, of course, a contributor to the Raiders site, justblogbaby.com. Maurice, it's always great to see you on C1 Interview. How's everything going?
Everything's going great. Everything's going great in Knicks land for me, but hoping the same that the Raiders are able to do the same thing what the Knicks did this few weeks ago and shock the world and be a team that is on the rise and on the come up and eventually wins a championship, a title, a Super Bowl, a Lombardi trophy, coming back to Las Vegas.
Oh, I agree with you. Well, let's just start with the obvious, though. When I looked at that schedule, I thought toughest schedule in the AFC by far. And I say that because weeks 7 through 10, Rams at home, at the Jets, at San Francisco, home versus Seattle. Where do you rank this schedule? I think it's the hardest in the AFC, no?
I think it's one of the toughest schedules in the league simply because I look at October. I believe you mentioned the Bills, the Patriots are in there. You mentioned the Rams. After they start off their season and have their players settled into whatever positions they have after training camp and the preseason, they're going to have to get it together real quick because if they don't, it could be 0-4. It could be an 0-4 streak in the middle of the season. And once you see that, you're thinking, okay, Kirk Cousins, who's expected to start, could be benched for Fernando Mendoza, and we can see the future in the present. So the Raiders, if they don't start off pretty quickly in September, it could go south in October, and then we could see some more of the young players on offense and the defensive side of the ball.
What game are you most excited for the upcoming season? And you can't say every one of them.
Selfishly, I would say Raiders versus Jets because they're coming to New York, but I'll save it and I'll say, you know what? I'll say the Chargers game early in the season because I think that's the first test of could this team be a surprise playoff team or are they a year or two away? The Chargers, as we know, perennial playoff contender, not a Super Bowl contender yet, but there's a lot of excitement over there with Mike McDaniel coming over and being the offensive coordinator. A lot of people are now picking Justin Herbert to be MVP. So that team is, you usually get the off-season buzz and the off-season hype, as Raider fans like to say it, but it's even more so this year because of the offensive coordinator that they have, and the offensive coordinator that they have as well. They bring in David Njoku. Ronnie Gadsden's coming in as a second-year tight end after a surprising rookie year. So again, a lot of excitement in Los Angeles. If the Raiders are able to pull off an early upset, because I'm not really worried about Miami, they are also a rebuilding team, but they're all able to pull off an upset against the Chargers, it could put a lot of the people and teams in the league on notice.
Oh, I agree with you. That's in the first 4 games of the season. They have to go to New Orleans, I believe, after that, week 3. With that being said, I think looking at this schedule, 7 or 8 wins would be unbelievable. If Clint Kubiak was able to get them to 9-8, I don't care what anyone says, that has to be the AFC Coach of the Year. I know some will say that's an overstatement, but 9-8 with that schedule, you have to play all of those really tough teams on the schedule this year. Of course, obviously, your division is no guarantee as well as we all know is also. But that would be incredible if they got to 9 wins, my opinion.
No, absolutely. 9 wins would probably be the ceiling for a lot of fans if you're thinking about it. And it also could get you into the playoffs depending on what happens with the other teams in the league, of course. But I would say 9 wins, you have to clap it up for Clint Kubiak. Of course, you don't have to do much to outdo what they did the last 2 years, 4 wins and 3 wins. But to triple your win total with that roster and that schedule, young roster and that schedule, would be a tip of the cap to Clint Kubiak and a lot of optimism for Raider Nation going forward.
No, I agree with that too. So here's my question. So, we're going into training camp. Rookies report July 23rd. Everyone else, July 28th. Obviously, let's put Fernando Mendoza aside because that's the obvious one. What other stories are you looking at for training camp?
I'm looking at the wide receiver position. I just wrote a piece at Just Blog Baby that Jack Besh could struggle to carve out a role based on Clint Kubiak's tendencies in Seattle. He runs a lot of two tight end sets, so it could be a big year for Michael Mayer. I know a lot of people want to see Jack Best stepping up because he is a second round pick from last year, but they did sign Jalen Nailor to a 3-year, $35 million deal. Kubiak pointed out Trey Tucker as a leader in that wide receiver room. Him being there, going through that turnover with offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator, but he has improved his numbers every year despite the turnover in the coaching staff of the Raiders. So Trey Tucker potentially a leader in that room, highly paid. Jalen Nailor coming in, Michael Mayer in two tight end sets. I worry about Jack Best a little bit. I want to see how that pass catching group takes shape at training camp. Who's going to get the reps? Who's going to be in that rotation, that wide receiver? And is Michael Mayer finally going to get his breakout year? Because as you know, he was regarded as a top tight end in his draft class. He hasn't been able to put it together because he's been away from the field for personal issues. And also his snap count has dropped in 3 years. So we'll see if he can kind of reemerge as one of those guys who could be a top tier tight end in this league under Clint Kubiak and his two tight end, multi tight end system.
So who is the one under the radar player that Raider fans should know about before the season starts?
Just wrote about him as well, Tonka Hemingway. He earned, according to Ryan McFadden of ESPN, who was at the practices, Tonka Hemingway has earned a ton of first team reps. And that's a sign that he could be in the rotation to play more than 50, 60% of the snaps. As you know, Raider fans have been talking about, they needed to draft a defensive tackle, particularly a nose tackle. Now, Tonka Hemingway is not that. He's about 6'2", 284. In my opinion, he's more of a pass rushing defensive tackle. He had 4 sacks last year quietly, 3 of them in the last 2 games. I know those last 2 games people didn't think about much because they were thinking about the draft position the Raiders were going to have. But Tonka Hemingway really caught on once he got on the field. He was a healthy scratch in the first half of the season. Once the young players got on the field, he really showed what he can do. He's also very versatile. At South Carolina, he lined up on the edge and on the inside. So he can do the same for the Raiders this year and be a surprise player that potentially is a top sack guy on that defense.
More headlines come out. There are more reports today. I'm just going to ask you, we talked about this last time, but Max Crosby being traded, I just think it's more likely than it was the last time we spoke, no?
That storyline is never going away. I mean, I would say that if the Raiders are 3-7, we talked about how tough the schedule will be in the middle of the season, October, November. If the Raiders are 3-7, 3-8, those headlines are going to get even more bold, and those whispers are going to come back because, let's be honest, Chris, Max Crosby is approaching 30, and the Raiders' timeline, we don't know where it is right now. We assume that they're not going to go to the playoffs this year. Maybe they surprise, maybe not. But if they're not even close to the playoffs, if they're at the bottom of the division, the bottom of the standings again, Max Crosby, is he going to have the patience to go through another slow build with this football team, knowing that he's approaching 30? He's coming off of a knee injury, meniscus. We all know the Baltimore Ravens backed out of the deal because they said they had concerns about his knee. Raider fans don't want to hear that. But what if there are concerns about his knee indoors? And the Raiders may think, okay, we should trade this guy while he has a value as we're building slowly. And if he is frustrated with the slow build, then you have to at least consider it. A GM's job is to take those calls. And I'm assuming that John Spytek will take those calls.
You wrote a great article for Bleacher Report a couple of days ago about players under the radar that could have a great upcoming season. One of them I thought was great was on Indianapolis wide receiver Josh Downs. He's going to probably be the number 2 this year. Tell me a little bit about that article and what you learned about some of these guys for the upcoming year.
What I learned about some of these guys is number one, you're looking around the league for guys who aren't the stars, right? So who's moving up the depth chart? And you realize some of these guys, of course, had some buzz in the offseason, but they also had a pretty good 2025 season and could have done more if in the right circumstance. So take Josh Downs, you mentioned, for instance. Daniel Jones went down in December, I believe. And you figure if he had his quarterback, his numbers would have been a lot better. So when you're looking at number 2 wide receivers who could potentially eclipse 1,000 yards and then cash in next year. If we're bringing it back to the Raiders, we just mentioned Trey Tucker, mentioned as a leader in that wide receiver room, improved his receiving numbers every year. If it's not Jalen Nailor, to me, it's probably Trey Tucker that breaks out of that wide receiver group to complement Brock Bowers. You look at Malcolm Kuntz on the defensive side of the ball. Can he look like the player he was before that ACL injury? He's on another prove-it deal. So these are the type of guys that you look at and say, okay, can they elevate? Can they take the next step? Or can they look like the player that they were a couple of years ago coming into a contract year where they're going to be looking at the money in 2027 offseason as a free agent?
Well said. Finally, New York Knicks win the NBA championship. I give you the floor, whatever you'd like to say.
It's been a long time coming, as Knicks fans know. I'm a Raider Knicks fan, and I'll say this, that I was surprised to see how many Raider Knicks fans there were as I was cheering on the Knicks in their run. There are a ton of Raider Knicks fans, some of them on the West Coast, some of them out here in New York City that I got to talk to and say, hey, we have something in common. Growing up on the East Coast, being a Raider fan and a Knicks fan, and people always asking, well, how did that come about? So I'll tell a quick story, Chris. I got to pick my football fandom as a Raider fan. I didn't get to pick the Knicks. I was born into a Knicks family. My mom is a Knicks fan, so I grew up being a Knicks fan. Knicks fan first. And then as I turned 9, 10 years old, family said, hey, basketball, baseball is Mets and Knicks. Pick your own football team. What's your favorite football team? And I identified with the Raiders. And I've been rocking with the Raiders and the Knicks since then. But the Knicks were my first fandom team. So it was good to see them win a championship in my lifetime. 1973 was the last year they won. My mom was a teenager. I wasn't even thought of yet. And it was just great to see it. And the run that they went on, the way they won it, the comebacks, Jalen Brunson proving a lot of the critics wrong, OG Anunoby being a kind of like an underspoken hero with the tip in and game 4. It was just the culmination of joy, and I enjoyed that with my family.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And just to let you know in closing, I would have never imagined how besides your story, the New York Knicks Las Vegas Raider, former Raider, before Las Vegas Raider combo would ever work. I don't understand how you can be a fan of a West Coast team and a fan of an East Coast team. That is really random.
It is random, but as I said, when you're born into a fandom and you don't really have a choice growing up in your area, that's kind of what your default is. But I do love the Knicks. But when I got to pick my own team, I just wanted to go outside of my local. I didn't identify with the Jets. I didn't identify with the Giants. And I just looked around the league and I said, what team identifies me as a person? I feel like growing up, I was kind of an outsider. I was kind of different, from the other kids in public school. And I feel like the Raiders were a different team in the league. They were just different than the other 31 teams. And I felt like this is my football squad. This is who I identify with. Also love the colors. Also Charles Woodson coming in. I was a big Charles Woodson guy when he was at Michigan. Raiders drafted him. And it was just confirmation that this is my football team and that's the team that I chose.
Yeah, amazingly, that was the end of the 90s. I remember that like it was yesterday, and I remember all those times. Different times for sure. Last question for you. Aside from the fact that Clint Kubiak is going to be there for the long term and consistency and be given a couple years, why should Raider fans believe about now? Any other reasons?
Other than Clint Kubiak?
Yeah.
I would say, other than Clint Kubiak, John Spytek, I know people have questions about his drafts and him trading in the second round. That kind of irks me too. But I think John Spytek did a good job in free agency. You look at he brings in Tyler Linderbaum. Who thought the Raiders would bring in Tyler Linderbaum? I didn't think the Ravens would let him go. And once they did let him hit the open market, analysts had him go into every other contender. The fact that Linderbaum, a 3-time Pro Bowl center, was willing to go to Las Vegas, a rebuilding team, tells you a lot about what that squad is building, not just with Clint Kubiak, but what John Spytek is building there. And I think his free agent class says a lot about where this team is going. Kwity Paye also, you mentioned Jalen Nailor. So I think John Spytek last year deserves a mulligan because I think a lot of that was controlled by Pete Carroll and him being an experienced head coach. And I talked a lot about having a very experienced head coach with an inexperienced general manager. To me, that's not a good matchup because a lot of times that head coach is going to run the show. Now that Pete Carroll is not there and you have a young head coach, inexperienced head coach in Clint Kubiak, this is John Spytek's show. And I like what he did in free agency. We'll see how the draft classes pan out. But I think people can start to believe in John Spytek, especially if his rookies start to produce in this upcoming season.
Well said, well done. Maurice Moton, find him, of course, at Bleacher Report and justblogbaby.com. And, of course, Mo Moton on X. It's down in the description below, but MOEMOTON. Maurice, it's always a delight to see you. We'll talk again, hopefully, after the preseason is done. I'm excited to see those games. There's only a couple weeks away. Can you believe it? It's almost here. Thank you so much, as always, for being on C1 Interview.
Appreciate you, Chris. Thanks for having me.